If you came here hoping to be told that you are special, chosen, or secretly superior to everyone else, this is where you should leave. This is not a message that will make you feel important. It is not here to validate your pain by turning it into a fantasy. And it is not going to confirm the story that the world is intimidated by you because you carry some invisible crown. Most people prefer that version. It's comfortable. It explains isolation without demanding responsibility. It turns discomfort into destiny and confusion into identity. But that story is a lie. When people go quiet around you, when conversations stall, when eyes linger and words don't come, it does not automatically mean you carry power, authority, or depth. And it certainly does not mean you were chosen. Silence does not crown you. Silence tests you. The internet is full of narratives that turn social friction into spiritual superiority. They tell you that being misunderstood means you're advanced, that being avoided means you're powerful, that being alone means you're ahead of everyone else. Those stories are seductive because they remove accountability. They give you meaning without requiring discipline. This video is not built on that logic, because the truth is more uncomfortable. Sometimes people go quiet because they don't know how to place you. Sometimes they pause because you don't follow familiar social patterns. Sometimes the silence has nothing to do with reverence and everything to do with uncertainty. And uncertainty is not a compliment. If you immediately interpret silence as admiration, you've already lost awareness. If you need other people's reactions to confirm your worth, you are still dependent, just dressed in better language. So let's be precise. There is no invisible mark. There is no divine exemption. There is no status earned simply by being observed. What exists instead is pressure. And pressure reveals structure. This conversation is not about making silence feel good. It's about asking whether you are mature enough to handle the effect you create without turning it into an identity. Whether you can stay grounded without needing to be understood. Whether you can exist without narrating yourself into importance. If that question makes you uncomfortable, that's intentional. Because from this point forward, this is not about why people stare. It's about what kind of responsibility you carry when they do. Let's ground this before it turns into mythology. The silence you're experiencing is real. It is not imagined, and it is not accidental. But it is also not mystical, divine, or evidence of hidden status. Silence appears in social environments for specific reasons, and most of them have nothing to do with admiration or fear. Silence emerges when expectations fail to lock in, when people can't quickly read the script, when the usual social cues don't land. Most human interaction runs on pattern recognition, tone, timing, posture, micro-reactions. People are constantly, unconsciously asking, who is this person? How do I relate to them? What role am I supposed to play here? When those questions don't resolve quickly, interaction slows. Words disappear. What you're noticing is not rejection and not recognition. It's assessment. You don't fill space the way most people do. You don't rush to signal agreement, friendliness, or relatability. You don't leak insecurity to smooth the interaction. And because of that, people don't get immediate feedback about where they stand with you. That creates silence. Not because you're powerful, not because you're intimidating, but because you interrupt automatic behavior. Silence is the pause that happens when the system doesn't know which routine to run. For people who are socially dependent on cues, validation, mirroring, emotional reassurance, this pause is uncomfortable. They don't know whether to lead, follow, impress, or withdraw. So they hesitate. They watch. They say less. This is important. Silence is not always about you. Often, it's about the other person losing their footing. But here's where most interpretations go wrong. People hear silence and immediately assign meaning that protects their ego. They turn uncertainty into elevation. They decide the room went quiet because they carry something rare. That leap is dangerous, because silence is neutral. It has no intention. It simply marks a disruption in expectation. And disruption cuts both ways. Sometimes silence means you are grounded. Sometimes it means you are unreadable. Sometimes it means you are emotionally contained. And sometimes it means you are simply not offering enough signal for others to engage. All four look the same on the surface. This section matters because if you don't understand that silence is situational, not symbolic, you will start building an identity on a misread signal. And identities built on misinterpretation don't create strength. They create blind spots. The silence around you is not random, but it is not a reward either. It is information. And what you do with that information is where responsibility begins. Now we need to dismantle the explanation most people reach for too quickly. The popular narrative says this: people go quiet around you because they're intimidated by your power, because they sense your authority, because you carry something they don't. That explanation feels good, and that's exactly why it's dangerous. It turns a neutral social response into a reward. It converts ambiguity into superiority, and it allows you to stop examining yourself. Here's the truth most people don't want to hear. Silence is rarely fear. Most of the time, it's uncertainty. People don't go quiet because they've detected your depth. They go quiet because they don't know which version of themselves to bring forward. You don't give them familiar signals to mirror. You don't reassure them with predictable reactions. And without those cues, they hesitate. That hesitation gets misread as reverence. But hesitation and respect are not the same thing. Assuming silence means admiration is the fastest way to lose discipline. Because the moment you decide the room is quiet because of your superiority, you stop asking harder questions. You stop checking your impact. You stop adjusting your presence. You replace awareness with story. And stories are comfortable places to hide. There is another uncomfortable possibility most people avoid. Sometimes people are quiet around you because you are emotionally closed, not composed. Because you are distant, not grounded. Because your restraint is defensive rather than deliberate. From the outside, those differences are invisible. Silence looks the same either way. This is why self-mythologizing is such a trap. It takes an effect and assigns it a cause that flatters you. It protects you from the risk of discovering that some of the silence around you may be something you are contributing to unconsciously. And here's the part that requires honesty. If you need silence to mean power, you don't have it. If you need to believe others are intimidated, you are already dependent on their reaction. Real authority doesn't require interpretation. It doesn't need to explain itself after the fact, and it doesn't collapse if people misunderstand it. So pause here. Before you decide what the silence around you means, ask whether you're using that explanation to avoid responsibility. Ask whether calling it intimidation saves you from refining your communication, your timing, your emotional availability. Because the work is not to feel elevated by silence. The work is to remain precise in the presence of it. Silence does not make you powerful. How you respond to it does. And most people fail that test long before they realize they're taking it. If your presence consistently changes the atmosphere of a room, that is not a gift. It is a burden. And most people are not prepared to hear that, because they've been taught to treat impact as entitlement instead of responsibility. A silent presence carries weight. Not mystical weight, not symbolic weight, real behavioral weight. It affects pacing. It alters how others speak. It changes the emotional temperature of a space. And the moment that happens, you are no longer neutral. You are participating, whether you intend to or not. This is where discipline begins. Because the truth is simple and uncomfortable. If your presence affects the room, you are responsible for what happens next. Not morally, not spiritually, practically. You don't get to enjoy the effect without accounting for the consequences. Many people like being watched. They like the pause. They like the way conversations slow down around them. It feels like gravity. It feels like significance. But they stop there. They treat the silence as proof of something internal instead of a signal that demands regulation. That's immaturity. A controlled presence requires more restraint, not less. More self-awareness, not mythology. You have to monitor how your silence lands, not just how it feels. You have to ask whether your lack of response stabilizes the space or destabilizes it, whether it creates clarity or pressure without direction. Because silence is not automatically leadership. Unregulated silence can intimidate without intention. It can create anxiety. It can freeze dialogue. And when that happens, the responsibility is no longer abstract. You are now shaping the environment without speaking. That demands accountability. Here's what most people avoid. If you carry a presence that others feel, you lose the luxury of unconscious behavior. You don't get to drift. You don't get to disappear into ambiguity. You don't get to let your internal state leak unchecked. Your tone matters even when you say nothing. Your timing matters even when you're still. Your emotional regulation matters more than your insight. This is the cost no one talks about. People love the idea of being felt. They rarely accept what it requires. It requires consistency. It requires predictability under pressure. It requires the ability to remain composed without becoming detached. Because detachment disguised as composure is just avoidance with better posture. A disciplined presence knows when to remain silent and when to intervene. It knows when silence creates space and when it creates distortion. And it does not hide behind ambiguity to avoid responsibility for the impact it creates. If you walk into rooms and people grow quiet, you don't get to decide that means authority. Authority is proven by what happens next. Does the space stabilize? Do others become more precise or more tense? Does clarity increase or does energy stall? Those outcomes matter more than how powerful you feel. This is why silent presence is not for everyone. It demands more self-control than expression ever will. It forces you to regulate your nervous system so others don't unconsciously react to your internal state. It requires you to be intentional with your stillness instead of romanticizing it. And if you're not willing to carry that responsibility, then silence is not your strength. It's your hiding place. Real authority is not silent by default. It is silent by choice. And choice only exists when you are capable of stepping forward without fear, without ego, and without needing the reaction to define you. So if your presence carries weight, stop asking what it says about you. Start asking whether you are strong enough to manage it without turning it into an identity. Because weight doesn't make you important. It makes you accountable. Silence is not a virtue by default. That distinction matters more than most people are willing to admit, because silence can either be a sign of strength or a sophisticated form of retreat. From the outside, they look identical. From the inside, they come from completely different places. Silence is strength when it is chosen. Silence is avoidance when it is automatic. Strength-based silence comes from regulation. It means you are capable of speaking, capable of engaging, capable of asserting yourself, and you decide not to, because restraint serves the moment better than expression. There is clarity behind it, intention, control. Avoidant silence comes from fear. Fear of being seen, fear of being challenged, fear of saying the wrong thing and losing control of the image you're trying to protect. It is not calm. It is frozen. Both produce quiet. Only one produces authority. The problem is that many people confuse the two because silence feels safer than action. It allows you to stay undefined. It protects you from exposure. And over time, that safety starts to feel like discipline. It isn't. Avoidant silence avoids risk, but it also avoids responsibility. It lets situations drift instead of being shaped. It creates ambiguity instead of clarity. And while ambiguity can feel powerful at first, it eventually turns into stagnation. Here's a hard truth. If you stay silent because speaking would cost you comfort, that silence is not strength. If you stay quiet because you don't trust yourself to remain grounded once you engage, that silence is not composure. It is containment without mastery. Strength-based silence, on the other hand, is paired with capacity. You know exactly what you could say. You know how you could intervene. And you also know when doing so would introduce more noise than value. That kind of silence stabilizes environments. It lowers emotional reactivity. It makes space for others without disappearing yourself. Avoidant silence does the opposite. It creates tension. People feel something is withheld. Conversations feel incomplete. Energy stalls because no one knows whether the quiet is intentional or fragile. This is where most self-deception happens. People tell themselves they are being observant when they are actually disengaged. They tell themselves they are being deep when they are actually withholding. They tell themselves they are being calm when they are simply afraid of the consequences of being clear. And the silence around them reflects that back, whether they want to see it or not. Here's the test most people avoid. Could you speak clearly, directly, and calmly if the situation demanded it, without over-explaining, without defending, without escalating? If the answer is no, then your silence is not a strength yet. It is a placeholder. Authority is not proven by how long you can stay quiet. It is proven by whether silence is one option among many, not the only one you can tolerate. So don't ask whether your silence feels powerful. Ask whether it is chosen, regulated, and reversible. Because silence that cannot be broken on command is not discipline. It is fear with better manners. This is where the narrative stops protecting you. No explanations, no reframing, no symbolism, just a reality check. If silence keeps appearing around you, the first responsibility is not to interpret it. It is to audit yourself without mercy, not emotionally, behaviorally. So pause here and don't rush past what follows. Ask yourself, when the room goes quiet, what are you actually doing? Not what you intend, not what you believe about yourself. What are you doing? Are you regulated or withdrawn? Are you present or merely contained? Are you choosing stillness or defaulting to it because action feels risky? Be honest enough to sit with the answer. Next question. If you decided to speak clearly in those moments, could you do it without tension, without explaining yourself, without sharpening your tone or softening it to be liked? If clarity feels dangerous to you, that's not depth. That's instability. Another question most people avoid. Does your silence make situations better or simply quieter? Do conversations gain structure after you enter, or do they stall? Do people become more precise or more careful? Silence that creates order is strength. Silence that creates hesitation is noise without sound. Now look closer. Are you using restraint to maintain alignment or to protect an image? Are you quiet because you trust yourself or because you don't trust what will happen if you engage? If speaking risks exposing uncertainty, then silence is not discipline. It is concealment. Ask this too. Do you feel secretly validated when people hesitate around you? Does the pause feed something in you? If the answer is yes, that's a warning sign. The moment silence becomes a source of identity, you are no longer leading yourself. You are feeding off reaction. That is dependency, not authority. Another hard one. If someone misunderstood you completely, would you be able to let that stand without correcting it? Not because you're above explanation, but because the situation doesn't require it. If being misread triggers urgency in you, then your stillness is fragile. Now ask the question that cuts deepest. If no one ever acknowledged your presence, would you still carry it the same way? If the silence stopped tomorrow, would your behavior change? If the answer is yes, then your presence was never internal. It was conditional. This audit is not here to shame you. It's here to remove fantasy. Because fantasy delays growth. It gives you meaning without cost, and cost is the only thing that turns potential into structure. If these questions feel confrontational, that's because they are meant to be. They are not accusations. They are filters. They separate people who want to feel powerful from people who are willing to become stable. You don't pass this audit by feeling confident. You pass it by being precise. And if you can't answer these questions cleanly yet, that doesn't disqualify you. It just tells you where the work actually is. Silence doesn't need interpretation. It needs regulation. And this is where that responsibility either begins or gets avoided again. This is the part most people don't want to hear. There is no guaranteed reward for carrying yourself with discipline. There is no promise that people will eventually understand you. There is no assurance that silence will turn into recognition. And if you need any of that, you're not ready for responsibility. The internet sells a comforting lie. Hold your ground long enough and the world will apologize. That one day, the people who misunderstood you will see clearly. That the quiet will break into applause. That restraint will be repaid with validation. That expectation is poison. Because the moment you endure with the hope of being recognized later, you are no longer disciplined. You are bargaining. You are postponing dependency, not eliminating it. You are still waiting for permission, just on a longer timeline. There are people who will never understand you. There are rooms that will never warm up. There are situations where your restraint will be misread as distance, arrogance, or indifference. That may never change, and maturity is accepting that without needing to correct it. Real authority does not come with social closure. It does not resolve every misunderstanding. It does not guarantee comfort. In many cases, it increases friction precisely because it refuses to perform for approval. If you are carrying yourself correctly, some people will always feel unsettled around you. Not because you are superior, but because you are not available for projection. You don't give them what they expect, and you don't explain yourself to make it easier. There is no prize for that. There is only alignment. And alignment is not glamorous. It is quiet. It is often lonely, and it rarely comes with witnesses. You do it because it's correct, not because it pays off. This is where most people turn back. They realize there's no finish line, no moment where the tension resolves, no public confirmation that they did it right. And without that, the discipline feels pointless. But discipline that requires recognition is not discipline, it's performance. So be clear with yourself here. If you are holding still because you believe it will eventually earn you something, respect, status, clarity from others, then you are already negotiating with your own standards. And negotiated standards collapse under pressure. There is no promise at the end of this. No reconciliation montage. No reveal where everything makes sense. There is only the option to remain precise without reward. And that option is what separates people who build internal authority from those who are only rehearsing it. If that feels heavy, good. Because weight is the only honest signal that you're no longer chasing a story. You're carrying a standard. There is nothing you need to do after this. No action to take. No declaration to make. No signal to leave behind. If you were waiting for instructions, this was never for you. This is not the kind of message that asks for agreement. It doesn't need validation, and it doesn't benefit from belief. It either landed or it didn't. And if it didn't, forcing it would only turn it into another idea you carry instead of a standard you live by. You don't need to follow this channel. You don't need to return. You don't need to explain what this meant to you. The only thing that matters is what happens when the silence shows up again. Whether you resist it, whether you romanticize it, or whether you regulate yourself inside it without turning it into a story. No one is watching to see if you understood this correctly. There will be no confirmation, no feedback loop, no moment where the weight resolves into clarity. That's intentional. Because discipline that depends on reinforcement is not discipline. And responsibility that needs recognition is not responsibility. If this changed nothing about how you carry yourself, then it was just information. And information without application fades quickly. If it did change something, subtly, internally, without excitement, then that's enough. You don't need to name it. You don't need to share it. You don't need to justify it. Let the silence test you again. Not to see if you feel powerful, but to see if you remain precise without needing to be seen. There is no ending here. Only the next moment where you decide whether to turn weight into identity or into responsibility.